Real Madrid keeps winning the Champions League so much that it's almost turning the competition into a farmers' league. I mean, up until the moment I'm making this video, they've won 14 titles and are on their way to winning the 15th. However, that was never the case, as they won their 7th title in 1998 after suffering for 32 years. I mean, their 6th title was back in 1966 when everything was black and white. And they tried and failed so many times, to the point where they lost 7 semifinals and a final to Liverpool. And they almost lost it in 1998 too, because something crazy happened, which is that the Ultras broke the goalpost and the referee almost cancelled the match. Also, a lot of people say that the only goal scored by Real Madrid in the final was offside, and that they rubbed Juventus. Well, we'll not say anything now, but we'll discuss after in the video all that and a lot of surprising things that happened during the season. But whether you think that goal was legit or not, it was the key to 7 other titles and maybe more if you're watching the video in the future. Because before that, everything was dark, and in 1997, they didn't even qualify for the Champions League as they finished 6th in La Liga. Especially since their rival FC Barcelona were starting to make a place for themselves in Europe and had the best players in the world, while Real Madrid were suffering economic and sporting problems. So to change the situation, they began making some changes by appointing Lorenzo Sanz as president of the club in 1995, but unfortunately, his first season was a failure. So after 1 year, he appointed Fabio Capello, who was considered the best coach in the world and had just won the Champions League with AC Milan after humiliating Barcelona in the final and won 4 Serie A titles, which was not easy to achieve. So he started working on the new project by signing important young players like Roberto Carlos, Zé Roberto, Clarence Seedorf, and Christian Panucci. I'm sure you all know them now as legends, but back then they were young. That's why they also signed some experienced players like Davor Suker, Predrag Mijatovic, and goalkeeper Bodo Illgner. On the other hand, they also got rid of some important players like Zamorano, Mikel Laudrup, and Luis Enrique. As you can see, they changed the whole team, and all these players were brought in by the president with his own money. As we said, the club was struggling financially, but they were all worth the money, because from their first season they managed to win La Liga, and Cruyff's project started to collapse. But the biggest surprise was that despite that success, Fabio Capello had to leave after only 1 season before even playing the Champions League, which was the reason he was brought in the first place. And that's because he was always criticized by the fans and media for playing a role as a left winger, but instead they want to play him as a striker or a second striker, where he gives his best. So the president had no choice but to let him go and appointed another experienced coach, who you all know, Jupp Heynckes. To be fair, at that time he didn't have the experience he had later, but he was a legend as a player and had previously coached Bayern Munich and had experience in Spain where he had coached Athletic Bilbao, so he was the right person for the job. They also signed some other young players like Carranca, Savio, and Cannibal, but the most important signing was Carambeu, who was wanted by FC Barcelona and many big clubs in Italy that had a lot of money. But in the end, he went to Real Madrid. And as you know, he won the World Cup with France in the same year. So with all these new and existing players, Real Madrid is full of stars. But they have a problem, which is that Heynckes was known for his strong personality and always had conflicts with the big players because he wants to control everything. But even though everyone knows that, they gave him a chance, as he told the media that from his previous experiences, he learned that the coach must be patient with the stars and promised everyone that they would win titles and that they would win La Liga like they did last season. But unfortunately, that didn't happen, as the only title they won besides the Champions League was the Spanish Super Cup over Barcelona, and they lost everything else as they drew or lost most games. But the Champions League was the complete opposite, as they finished the group stage on top, winning 4 games, drawing 1 and losing 1, in a group that included Porto, Rosenborg, and Olympiacos. At that time, the Champions League system was a bit different. They had 24 teams split into 6 groups. The leader of each group, along with the top 2 second-place teams, would make it through to the next round. So they went to face Leverkusen in Germany and drew, so considering it's an away game, it's a good result. But just 3 days later, they lost 3-0 to Barcelona, and a week later they drew against Racing Santander, and the media started saying they would be out of the Champions League too. But 3 days later, they beat Leverkusen easily with a clean 3-0 win. But as always, their results in La Liga haven't improved. They are now on round 31, and have drawn 10 games and lost 6, meaning they have dropped points in more than half of the games and have been on top of the league for only 2 rounds all season. Now they face Dortmund in the semi-finals, who are the defending champions and very strong. The first leg was at the Bernabeu, and as we said, something crazy happened that day, which is that before the game, the Ultras Sur, who are well known for their racism and violence, a group of them broke the goal at the south end after they climbed the iron fence behind it, and there was no way to fix it and no goal to replace it. So everyone started to panic as Dortmund began to force the referee to stop the game and give them a clean 3-goal win. But Agustin Herrin, who was the assistant stadium delegate, had the idea to go to Ciudad Deportiva, which is the former training complex of Real Madrid, and get the goal from there. The problem is that it's 2 kilometers away, but he decided to go anyway, and when he got there, the gates were closed, so he climbed the fence and ended up tearing his pants to get through. And by the way, the man was 63 years old at the time. So he found the goal, but the vehicle he was using wasn't big enough to carry it, so he went out and found a truck driver and convinced him to help him. He agreed because he was a Madridista, but he found another obstacle, which was that the goal was inside a room and he didn't have the key. So they used the truck to open the door by force, and finally took it and called the police to help them go through the red light without stopping because they were running out of time, and when they arrived, everyone started helping to fix the goal and the match started. Of course, the club compensated the truck driver with gifts and money, and as you know, Agustin Herrin became a hero of the club and was part of this achievement. But despite all these efforts, the game was already 75 minutes late and the club was punished with a 1-game stadium closure and a fine of 115 million pesetas. But it was worth it because they won the match with a 2-goal difference, and in the second leg, they fought back and drew the match. And after long years of suffering, they went to the final to face Juventus, the best team in Europe and playing their 3rd consecutive final. But unfortunately for Real Madrid, they were still struggling in La Liga, where they were in 4th place in the league, 11 points behind champion Barcelona, and they were fighting to finish in that position until the last minutes of the last game. Because if they didn't win this game against Real Betis, they would play the final under great pressure. And if they didn't win, they would lose the title and their chance to play the Champions League next season. But luckily for them, they won and the pressure disappeared. But something else happened that helped them even more. As we said, Coach Heynckes always finds issues with the big players, and the same thing happened at Real Madrid. So the president called him a week before the final to ask him how things were going, and the coach told him that he was frustrated and would not work with those players after the final. So the president thought to take advantage of that and gathered the most important players and told them that the coach is leaving at the end of the season and that he says he can't win anything with them. So everyone had to put the conflicts aside and focus only on the final to prove him wrong. And it was also like another pressure that went away because knowing that the coach was leaving and taking all the responsibility was a relief. But to be fair, everyone was under pressure because they knew what this final meant after 32 years of trying, especially since they had lost everything. As the president said, if we hadn't won the European Cup, this would have been one of the worst seasons in recent years. Manolo Sanchez also spoke about the final by saying what it means. There was a lot of pressure because this final was probably the most important game in Real Madrid's history. The club had been waiting for it for 32 years, but the coach had to make sure the team was mentally ready. It was a complicated year because we weren't performing well in the league, and that prevented us from focusing at the highest level in the Champions League. But the coach managed to put us in a state of mind that made us forget the league and give our best in Europe. And they did just that, beating Juventus with a single goal, scored by Mijatovic in the 66th minute, and they had to defend for half an hour to finally win the title after a long wait. Of course, as you know, even today, many people say that the goal was offside and that they rubbed Juventus, and the media started talking about it again after Real Madrid recently faced Juventus in the 2017 final. And Dani Alves mentioned it, but for us, we can't be sure if it's true or not because at that time there weren't so many cameras. I mean, even today with VAR and dozens of cameras, sometimes we can't be sure. But there are 2 pieces of evidence that both sides are using against each other. The first is that when Roberto Carlos kicked the ball, a defender touched it and it went to Mijatovic, who was offside and scored. And the law says if a shot from a teammate rebounds off a defender directly to an attacker who was in an offside position when the shot was taken, it's considered an offside violation. But as you can see, they use the verb rebound, which is usually used when the ball bounces off the crossbar, which means that the player should have been stationary and not trying to change the direction of the ball. But as you can see here, the defender tried to play the ball and lost it. But some say he wasn't, so we can move on to another piece of evidence, which is that Mijatovic wasn't even offside. To prove this, we have to go back a little bit before the ball went to Roberto Carlos. Here we have the right back Pessotto, and if we move to the other angle, we can't see him until Mijatovic almost scored. Here we see him running back to the line, and after he scored, he looked at the referee and didn't say anything, which means he might have come back until it was too late. And as you can see, the players didn't protest at that time. I mean, given the fact that the ball came from the defender, with all the technology we have today, we would have different opinions. But it has to be considered a goal because it's unique. It was scored in the 66th minute, and the last time Real Madrid won the Champions League was in '66 when they beat Partizan Belgrade in the final, the club where Mijatovic started his career and played. And that title was without a doubt the key to all the trophies that followed and made Real Madrid the best club in the world. Because a lot of football fans who think otherwise, or when they try to minimize the value of the Champions Leagues won by Real Madrid, say that they won them when there was only black and white, and 5 of them in a row. But to be fair, even if you're not a Real Madrid fan, let me tell you something. First, why didn't the other clubs do it too? I mean, they weren't competing alone. They lost 2 finals in 1962 and 1964. And second, even if we forget those 6 titles and only count the Champions League they won after they rebranded it, they still have 8 titles and maybe more, depending on when you are watching, which is more than the other teams have won, even if we count all the titles they even won when it was just black and white.